Fans of Guns N' Roses know that they play from the heart, pulling lyrics from experiences rooted in addiction, pain, poverty, and abuse. This is the tragic, real-life story of one of history's greatest rock bands. This one is perhaps as unsurprising as it is tragic, but each and every single one of the Appetite for Destruction era band members came from a broken home. Drummer Steven Adler's father left the family when he was a kid. His resulting problematic behavior forced his mother to send him to his grandparents in Hollywood, where he met Saul Hudson. Hudson, popularly known as Slash, was also the child of divorced parents. They'd split in 1974 after years of trying to hold a marriage together while in separate countries. Like Adler, Slash neglected school and indulged in substance abuse. Naturally, the two decided to form a band. It never materialized, but they did search for a bassist long enough to meet one Michael Duff McKagan, a Seattle punk transplant with a passion for music and an addiction to alcohol. Duff's parents were also divorced. Meanwhile, Indiana natives Jeffrey Isabel, known as Izzy Stradlin, and childhood friend William Bailey, better known as Axl Rose, were also the products of broken homes. Stradlin's parents divorced when he was 8, while Axl's parents split when he was still 2. Axl has since described his childhood home as intensely religious, and he claims he and his siblings endured regular physical abuse as children. LA's Sunset Strip was, in the mid-'80s, a scene of both ascendant rock and roll glory and shattered dreams. For every Rat or Poison that went on to multi-platinum success, there were countless bands that called it a day after getting nowhere. Guns N' Roses is arguably the most legendary band to break out of this scene, but its constituent members were in multiple failed bands before forming their most famous group. For example, the band Road Crew, consisting of Slash, Steven Adler, and Duff, briefly sought a singer but disbanded in less than a year with no releases. Slash and Adler would later join Hollywood Rose, in which both Axl and Izzy Stradlin were playing. However, despite having 4 of Guns' later 5 classic members, this group would also fall apart before achieving any notable success. Then Rose and Stradlin would go on to join LA Guns. Unlike Road Crew and Hollywood Rose, LA Guns would in fact get a record deal and achieve moderate success at the tail end of the decade without either Rose or Stradlin. However, like Road Crew and Hollywood Rose, they're far more famous for being the band that contained future members of Guns N' Roses. After forming Guns N' Roses in 1985 and having a few practice sessions, the boys decided to launch their first West Coast tour. However, the absence of a working vehicle, money, ticket sales, or any reputation made for a rough time. The car the band did have, into which they packed all their gear, broke down a few hours north of LA and left them stranded. Unwilling to wait for repairs, they decided to abandon their heavier equipment and hitchhike to as many gigs as they could get to. When they got to Seattle, none of the very few patrons present in the bars they played in were interested in this scrappy, no-name outfit that reeked of beer and sweat. Unimpressed with the lack of business the band drew in, at least one club owner refused to pay until the boys cornered him in the back office and threatened significant bodily harm. The band then had to hitchhike back to LA with barely enough money for gas station food to get them there. However, several members have since cited the challenges of the so-called Hell Tour as what cemented their friendship. The Hell Tour may have been a brief baptism of fire for the band, but it wasn't exactly smooth sailing upon their return to LA. They had each other's backs, but no reputation, no money, and few connections. In short, they had to build a following from scratch. In his autobiography, Slash explains that Guns had to pay for club slots, exhausting much of the funds the band did collect at various odd jobs and forcing them to turn elsewhere for food and shelter. The group did manage to later rent a number of tiny spaces in which to crash and practice, but these places quickly became neighborhood hubs for out-of-control depravity and filth. Parties raged into the wee hours of the morning and spilled into the surrounding streets, attracting frequent police attention. Still, the band's financial problems persisted until they signed a lucrative deal with Geffen Records. Appetite for Destruction, the band's 1987 debut, took the world by storm when monster hits like Sweet Child of Mine and Welcome to the Jungle began getting regular radio and MTV video rotation roughly a year after the album's release. In Mick Wall's War, the unauthorized biography of Axl Rose, Tim Collins, the manager of Aerosmith for whom Guns was opening in 1988 when Appetite topped the charts, said, "They basically just exploded. Rolling Stone magazine showed up to do a story on Aerosmith, but Guns N' Roses ended up on the cover of the magazine. Suddenly, the opening act was bigger than we were." Months later, Guns N' Roses co-headlined England's Monsters of Rock festival. During Guns' performance, a moshing crowd of more than 100,000 repeatedly rushed the gate near the stage. Axl repeatedly stopped the set to demand they take several steps back. However, the music ultimately continued, and so did the chaos. After their set, the band learned 2 fans had indeed been killed. The group was devastated, but the media blamed them for the tragedy and slapped them with the moniker of, quote, the most dangerous band in the world. By the end of 1988, Guns N' Roses was one of the most popular bands on the planet, but with limitless money and fame came just as much, and often unwanted, media attention. The group released GNR Lies at the end of the year, an acoustic EP featuring the top 10 single Patience, which is still a staple of the band's live sets. However, it also featured One in a Million, a song with lyrics considered shocking and bigoted even at the time. Axl spent years dodging numerous accusations about his character in the aftermath of the album's release.
Guess what? I changed my point of view. For me now, it's kind of like live and let die.
In early 1990, Guns N' Roses won twice at the American Music Awards, with Slash and Duff accepting both awards. The bandmates were also thoroughly drunk and dropped so many curse words on live TV that their mics had to be cut. This was all in addition to ongoing coverage of the Monsters of Rock disaster, as well as bar fights, assaults, arrests, and even a proposed parking lot brawl between Axl and Motley Crue's Vince Neil over an allegation that Stradlin had hit on Neil's wife at a party. The fight never happened, according to Ultimate Classic Rock, but it got plenty of coverage. Even in a group as notoriously wild and permissive as Guns N' Roses, firings really did happen. The band had been alarmed at Steven Adler's deteriorating condition for some time before they pulled the trigger and released him. In 1990, the group returned to the stage after a break for what was supposed to be the warm-up show for a tour promoting their upcoming albums, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2. Adler, high, stumbled on the way to the drum riser in front of the whole crowd, humiliating and enraging a band that was quickly losing patience with him. It was the last show he'd ever play with Guns. In July 1990, he was formally fired, with Matt Sorum, then the drummer for the Cult, replacing him. In 1991, Adler sued the band for misleading him in various contracts, and he was awarded a substantial out-of-court sum. The Use Your Illusion double album was released in 1991 to immediate success and enormous fanfare. According to the New York Times, industry expectations put it on the same level as Michael Jackson. It largely delivered, too, selling 500,000 copies in 2 hours and having since sold a combined 35 million. With Matt Sorum on drums and keyboardist Dizzy Reed added to the roster at Axl's insistence, the band embarked on a 2.5-year-long world tour that was fraught with controversy. For example, there were riots, including the 1991 Riverport riot and another one in Montreal where the band shared a bill with Metallica that were spectacularly expensive and fully the fault of Axl Rose. Then there were the late starts where Rose often enraged the crowd by taking the stage hours after the band was scheduled to perform. And then there were the mid-set storm-offs by, you guessed it, Axl Rose. But things only got crazier from there. Izzy Stradlin, newly sober and unable to take the pressure and unending madness, left the band in 1991, while Duff, Matt, and Slash sank further and further into an abyss of alcohol abuse. Behind the scenes, late fees, police coverage, and excessive partying ensured the tour stayed heavily over budget and barely profitable for its duration. By 1992, the success of Nirvana had ushered in the grunge era and the end of bloated 80s glam rock. Guns N' Roses, which was far more popular than most of the bands associated with the subgenre, had survived the initial hairband winnowing in the early 90s. But by the time the Use Your Illusion tour finally lumbered to an end in 1993, even GNR couldn't escape the fact that the music world had changed forever. They released The Spaghetti Incident, a collection of punk rock covers, in late 1993 to lukewarm success. After that, clashing egos and dwindling relevancy led to intense turmoil in the ranks. Axl, increasingly acting like a corporate boss, strong-armed the other members into signing over their rights to the band's name to him. In 1996, Slash quit the group over increasing frustration with Axl's demands and the band's inability to record new music. Duff also left the following year while Axl fired Matt Sorum. By 1998, he was the only original member remaining. After leaving Guns N' Roses, Slash, Duff, and Matt Sorum formed Velvet Revolver. Izzy Stradlin formed the Juju Hounds. Steven Adler played in several bands like the ongoing Adler's Appetite. Axl, meanwhile, who'd grown increasingly reclusive, soldiered on with his version of Guns N' Roses. His constant hiring and firing of various studio musicians like guitar virtuoso Buckethead and the Replacements' Tommy Stinson led many to think that the once triumphant rock band had been reduced to a never-ending revolving door of hired guns. The band was also continuing forward with plans to eventually release the long-awaited follow-up to the Use Your Illusion records titled Chinese Democracy. However, the album was constantly being tinkered with and ultimately delayed a number of times. After it was finally released in 2008, it received fairly positive reviews and sold a few million copies. But its legacy is far more centered around its outrageous costs, the inexcusable amount of time it took to release, and the eccentricities of Axl Rose during this period. Duff McKagan, bloated from years of drinking, nearly died in 1994 when his pancreas effectively exploded, leaking digestive enzymes into his body. In order to survive, he got sober and healthy. Slash briefly died from a heroin overdose during the Use Your Illusion tour, according to the BBC, but he was revived. In 2001, at age 35, he was diagnosed with congestive heart failure and given a month to live. However, he too sobered up, and with the help of a surgically implanted defibrillator, he's long since cleared his expected expiration date. Years later, after getting pneumonia at a Cher concert he attended and being forced off cigarettes for several weeks to recover, he decided to ride the momentum and kick that habit for good too. Steven Adler had spent the majority of the 90s plummeting further into drug addiction, even being arrested in 1995 for felony heroin possession. The next year, he suffered a stroke that left him with a permanent speech impediment. In the years since, drug-induced depression led him to attempt suicide on a number of occasions. Thankfully, Adler survived and is currently doing well. If you or anyone you know is having suicidal thoughts, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255.